to the Weekly Bioanalysis, a KCAS podcast.
Hello and welcome to the 52nd episode and the final one of 2021 of the Weekly Bioanalysis, the official podcast of KCAS Bioanalytical and Biomarker services. KCAS is a bioanalytical CRO serving the pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical industries for over 40 years. My name is John Perkins and I've been in the bioanalytical LCMS space for over 27 years. I'm here with my co-host Dominic Orino.
Hello, my name is Dominic Warino, and I have been in the bioanalytical, LBA, and biomarker space for over 27 years.
Dominic and I are senior scientific advisors at KCS, and either or both of us are available to answer any questions you may have regarding this podcast or any of KCS's services. I'm located in upstate New York, Dominic is in Kansas, and our producer is in Missouri, so we're all over the map. We are thrilled to have you listening to the 52nd episode of the podcast, which is now available virtually everywhere. Wherever you choose to find and play your podcasts, you can now likely find the Weekly Bioanalysis. We welcome all of you, whether you're joining us for the first time or if you're a regular listener. We started the podcast when COVID restrictions prevented us from continuing business as usual. We were unable to meet colleagues face to face, but we want to continue communicating with everyone. The podcast was an idea we'd always had, but it suddenly became the perfect medium for us to employ. Today's podcast will be a review of the latest news and resources, and then a focus on the topic of our choosing before discussing any feedback we've had from you. We're constantly looking for topics, and we'd be happy to discuss something that you want us to cover. Then we'll wrap up and give you a little teaser for the next episode, letting you know what is coming in the future. So again, we're thrilled to have you here, and we are looking forward to a fun episode today. To kick us off for podcast number 52, Dominic is going to go over today's podcast topic a bit before we jump into the news and resources section. Dom.
Yeah, John, today, as always, we'll have first our news and resources, which will go over some of the latest on COVID and then latest non-COVID news. And then the main portion, we're going to focus on the emergence of the Omicron variant. We're going to talk a little bit about the recognition of the new variant and how that was discovered, some of the contagiousness of it, and then others just around what the vaccine efficacy is, and maybe touch on some therapeutics. So, John, let's get right into it.
Okay, let's move over to the news. Dominic, do you want to kick off our first item?
Yeah, John, thanks. As always, we'll start with some COVID topics. I just got a short list of news items today, but as always, we'll start with COVID. And the first one is risk for severe COVID-19 and death plummets with Pfizer booster. Yeah, this is not surprising at all, John. We've always been very active in support of vaccines and the science behind them. And in this instance, it doesn't surprise any of us that a booster shot can only help you. Of course, natural immunity is part of it as well, but I think anybody who has a good grasp on the immune system can appreciate that a vaccine is the best way to try to protect oneself against any COVID outbreak or certainly severe COVID. And this is just some staggering stats here, John. Why don't you dig in a little bit?
Sure. So this is actually two studies from Israel, which at the time was going through a major spike. And this is all done before the Omicron variant, which obviously we're going to talk about more in depth later. But both studies showed that the Pfizer BioNTech booster lowers the risk for confirmed illness, severe illness, and death. One study looked at 4 million patients, and it said the confirmed SARS-CoV-2 infection was lower in the booster group than in the non-booster group by a factor of about 10. And so that's vaccinated versus the 3 doses. And they looked at a number of different age groups, starting with age 16 all the way up to beyond 65. And another study really confirmed the same thing. Both were over short time frames because it was at the time of a quick spike in infection cases. The other study was around 800,000 people, so not quite to the same scale. But it actually was interesting because in looking at that, there was also the CDC actually put out some information on their data by vaccine status, and saying that unvaccinated people have 451 cases per 100,000, vaccinated 134 cases per 100,000, and then boosted 48 cases per 100,000. So there are still breakthroughs, but markedly reduced. And it's that. And then looking,
John, hang on. That I want to unpack what you just said
Sure.
for our audience that is listening, because that is one key stat. So sure, there's been the CDC just released, recently released, it's 451 deaths in unvaccinated people.
cases, not
Oh,
deaths.
sorry. 451 cases per 100,000 and 6.1 deaths. Which is still quite high relative to vaccinated, which the number of vaccinated cases is 134. So that is almost, 4 times lower, or 3.5 times lower.
Yeah.
About 3 times lower. And then the number of deaths goes from 6.1 to 0.5 in vaccinated individuals.
So it's 12 times lower. And then if you go boosted, it's 48 cases, which is about 10 times lower than the unvaccinated. But death,
they did this
is
right.
Really
they do
where
it
it
per
kicks
100.
in.
I want to emphasize the data we're looking at. They do it per 100,000 per 100,000 people. That normalizes the actual stats on this. It's not like the number of vaccinated, because the number of unvaccinated people is a third, and so that's not playing into this. This is solely based off of, it's been normalized across 100,000 people. So this makes me want to go get my booster shot, John, almost immediately.
Yeah, I mean, it's particularly when you look at the deaths, and it's 0.1, which is 0.1 versus 6. That's it's per 100K. I mean, it really is drastically reducing.
Sorry to cut you off there, but this caught my eye quite a bit, and it's, to me, I want everybody, if you're not vaccinated, the risk of what you think the side effects, and mind you, I'm not a physician. If you have other things that are wrong with you, that's a different story. But if you're unvaccinated and you're still hesitant, I really wonder what the hiccup there is, because the numbers we're looking at here, there's whatever the side effects are, we're not seeing that to be germane. But let's continue, John.
I mean, any reports of side effects have always been, there's low incidences, and it's a question of, is it the vaccine, is it something else, which we obviously we don't know, because we're not party to the information. But when it comes down to deaths, when you're talking, the boosted population is 0.1 deaths per 100,000, which is 60 times lower than unvaccinated people. It really says you go in this direction, get your 3 shots if you can, and
I think let's move on. But it's just one of those things where, at some point, the polio vaccine came out and everybody was super compliant, even though we didn't know the long-term effects of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't understand that argument sometimes. That's all. But let's go on, John. And I don't know if we're wrapping up on that particular story, but it was really a very powerful study done by.
I think we can. I mean, let's just say the conclusion from one of the sets of authors. Booster vaccination programs may provide a way to control transmission without costly social distancing measures and quarantines. Our findings provide evidence for the short-term effectiveness of the booster dose against the currently dominant Delta variant in persons 16 years of age or older. So, it's the numbers all support each other. So you've got Israeli sources versus CDC all coming to a similar conclusion.
Yeah, it's awesome. That was good way to, John. But we're going to switch in and talk about even more fun stuff, right? How COVID vaccine shaped 2021 in 8 powerful charts is the name of this article, and it leads in nicely to what we've always been passionate about, and that is getting vaccines to the world. So, John, I know you're probably chomping at the bit to talk about this one as well, because I think it's moving in the right direction, and that's why we do this. We want to see movement in the right direction.
Yeah. So this was a review article in Nature, and some of the charts are definitely more fascinating than others. But the point they're making is we've more than 4.4 billion people have had one or more dose, which represents about 56% of the world population. So there are estimates of the number of lives that have been saved, and it really it's shown just what the pharmaceutical industry can do when they pull together to address something like this. But the first chart, and I won't always refer to the charts, but I did think it was really interesting to see which of the dominant vaccines in terms of how much has been administered. And actually, at least when this was published, well, actually, data as of the 14th of December, the AstraZeneca vaccine is actually the most administered around the globe, followed by Coronavac, which I think must be one of the. I'm not sure what the Coronavac is. I think.
That sounds like a
Oh, I think that
Europe.
was. I think that was an Indian developed one. Actually, I'm going
Ah,
to quickly Google that while we're
I'll find
talking.
it. You go ahead, John. Tell the list. I'll find it.
Yeah, but then, so we always talk about Pfizer because that's obviously a dominant one here. But it's actually in terms of worldwide administration, it's the third most administered. I mean, it's between 2 and 2.5 billion doses. Um, and then, so the Coronavac is actually it is one of the two Chinese vaccines, so that it's
Correct.
actually Sinovac.
Correct.
And then Sinopharm is the other Chinese vaccine,
Yeah,
and
and
again,
that
it's
one
in
is in.
excess of 2 billion doses.
It,
Once you
sorry,
get
John. Sorry.
once you
Go
get
ahead.
beyond those ones, it drops off a long way to Moderna, that again is a very high profile one in the US, but hasn't made that impact across the world. So it's interesting to see that. I mean, so we're talking
Well, you know
somewhere in the
why,
region
right?
of
But
8
John,
billion
I want
doses
to unpack.
administered so far.
I
Sorry, go
keep
on.
talking over you today. You keep talking so many good things, but I think you just said something fascinating. The reason why some of those vaccines have hit others, the cold chain issue. So even though Pfizer's third, it's been impressive that they've overcome it. Moderna hasn't. That's a cost thing that's limiting them. Pfizer has bigger reach with BioNTech, and then the others are attenuated viruses and don't require it, John. So I
It's
think
it's it's also scale of the company. Remember, we talked about this
yes.
last time that Moderna are tiny, relatively tiny compared to Pfizer and
Okay,
AstraZeneca. You've
and then
got
of course,
with China, you had the government buying in and really rolling it out very quickly to the Chinese army, etc. And they've been very focused on rolling it out to unserved nations. And before we go on much longer, you've gone very quiet, Dom. Is your microphone still definitely functioning?
it is. I just had it away from my mouth because I'm, you
Ah,
know.
okay, okay, there we go.
Yeah, John. I think the one I'll end with. It's impressive how much AstraZeneca has gotten their vaccine out there. But let's continue. Yeah.
And that probably is helped by the Serum Institute in India and the work that they've done in terms of working with AstraZeneca on that.
Another great story we covered. If you missed it, you can check that out on a previous
Yes.
podcast.
S- So then, I mean, again, part of this review is, obviously the speed these vaccines came out is phenomenal. I mean, we the virus was identified late 2019, but we actually had authorized vaccines a year later, which is much shorter time than any vaccine we've seen to date. And again, this Nature article talks about some of the other conditions that we've dealt with, but some took decades before they had an effective vaccine. In terms, say, typhoid fever, polio was decades in development, Ebola's been decades in development. Yet it took a year with really applying what we knew to develop vaccines that have been shown to be very effective in the field, which is just incredible.
Yeah, I'll say measles had the shortest tenure of any of them, and that was back in the about took about I think it's a little under 10 years based off of this graph, but it is impressive, wonderful. I didn't realize how long polio had taken, although I guess when you look at some of these, were 1900s, 1920, 1920s for typhoid and meningitis and whooping cough and polio. No one had been on the moon yet. Now we're putting former NFL stars into space. So it's not surprising that the technology's rapidly advancing.
It's true of everything, isn't it? I mean, when you look at, I always look back at when I started doing mass spectrometry, and the computers that ran the instruments were huge in terms of the real estate they took up, and the disks were massive, but they really barely held any data at all compared to what we can hold now.
Wow.
And so our phones are more powerful computers than like what sent man to the moon, and
Yeah.
ran
And
our
that,
ran mass
and
spectrometers, etc.
yeah, and you know that a lot of people question technology, but technology and communication is the reason why we talked about it throughout the vaccine. How we had, I don't like the word unprecedented; it's so overused, but we had seen big pharma and big biotech play together in ways that I don't think you and I ever dreamed would have occurred. That really truncated this as well. But it's a great story, John. I think I don't know if you got any more in this one. Maybe we can move on.
I,
But
th- I
the
think
fact it was really cool, and maybe we'll get these for Jeremy, and he can post them along when he does it, so people can actually see it. But if there's anything else related to that, otherwise we'll move on to our non-COVID topic.
I think it's just some of the things of estimates in terms of lives saved. They talk 750,000 in the US and Europe. It really is, again, there's a massive number of vaccines in development, and one of the stories recently has been that you're seeing vaccines. People are developing them on their own, but they're actually also focusing a lot on how they act as boosters on top of existing vaccines. So the Sanofi GSK vaccine, it's delayed in terms of its phase 3 data because it's difficult to recruit and etc. But they've also done the testing to show how effective it can be on top of existing vaccines. And there's a couple of other smaller players have issued similar data to say where their vaccine can work into things. But I mean, you look at the under development, there's 194 in preclinical, 40 in phase 1, 44 in phase 2, 40 in phase 3, and we have 23 in use, and 10 of those are in phase 4. So it's still a lot of attention being paid for this. It's not just in terms of injection. There's obviously oral ones that are being looked at, inhaled ones. This is obviously a story that will keep adding to itself because there's so much going on. And then the big part of it is, so we have the issue that we talked about a lot of time, the geographic inequity, and so we're trying to spread that across the globe at the same time where we're also saying that you need boosters. So where we'd hope that by now the US would be done, we're now saying, well, we need third doses before we can pass it on to the rest of the world. Meantime, we're also expanding the population who are eligible in terms of children. So that's still going to be an ongoing challenge in terms of getting it out to everyone that needs it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's good to see some of those cross studies to allow for just wider distribution. All signs point to it being the way to get us to normalcy. So,
yep.
And then, of course, therapeutics. But we're going to move on. Therapeutics might be another good topic because I think there's probably as many therapeutics in the market that are being researched. So, John, let's go non-COVID, right?
Yep.
Injectable dancing molecules repair spinal cord injury, restore mobility in paralyzed mice. So this really caught my interest, and I've always been this is a hobby of mine because I'm not a neurobiologist, but studied it a little bit. And I've always thought, why couldn't we heal spinal cord injuries? Why can't we get paraplegics and paralysis cured? And really, it's the cueing of so many millions or thousands of neurons and getting them connect. Think of it as male-female connectors and cords and plugins to do it in such an orchestrated way to get it to really function. Well, maybe there's hope, right, John? I think that's what this is talking about.
Yes. So, I mean, just to give a little bit of details, this is a team at Northwestern University who think they found a way to make a technique for regenerating injured spinal cords work. We've got two peptides that are altered so they amp up nerve regeneration. And so the article talks about the key to therapy is dancing molecules. This is the lead author Samuel Stupp has designated them that, and it's two peptides that they work together to make nanobodies, and so nanofibers, I think it is, to then build from there, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's it. And that dancing is, I called it an orchestra, but same thing, and it's all, kind of Brownian movements, on-off rates, and then just getting the right. It's not you can't get 100%, but the body is so powerful and so redundant that if you've ever been, cut and you see scars, well, you're still okay in that section, and that's what it's about. Maybe restoring X amount, but it's
So, so,
it's
so,
fascinating.
so one peptide reduces scarring and the other promotes the formation of blood vessels.
Hmm.
This controls the motion of the molecules in nanofiber matrix in ways that promoted regeneration. So this is a great story because it's saying here's research is going on everywhere, but here's something that could really be the future, a step towards the future of a condition that 10 years ago we wouldn't even be thinking about. It's that kind of a story, and just what basic research can indicate
Yeah.
is the potential hope.
Yeah, we got another one that's um I did say another one, the non-COVID related, John, and it's more nanotechnology stuff, and it's really, similar sort of way to try to overcome traditional dogmas when it comes to treating immuno-oncology. And so they literally, this is titled "New Insights into How Cancer Cripples Immune Cells and Could Fuel Fresh Immuno Approaches," and more around. This one goes through mitochondrial stimulation, is what I think about. And if you've heard me talk about mitochondrial stimulation, that's taking cold showers and things. And I've always been a big fan of getting your mitochondrial going. You can do it through food, exercise, cold showers, and now perhaps they've got ways to target your T cells. And I'll give a shout out to Brigham and Women's Hospital, which is where my sister worked for years.
Sure.
But yeah, John, tell us a little more.
So this is basically a team of scientists at Brigham and Women's Hospital and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology used microscopy to watch how breast cancer cells and T cells interacted, and what they observed was that the cells connect to each other with tiny tendrils, and then the cancer cells use those connections to suck energy from the T cells. So they basically, so by looking at this interaction, now it's a case of, well, what can you do medically to break that up and hopefully use that mechanism as a way to disrupt the cancer cell's growth. So again, this is not, it's not basic research, it's really high powered research, but it's what they're doing is potentially giving us another direction whereby we can attack cancer in the future.
Yeah,
So
they're hijacking the mitochondrial energy, right? That's what these
yes,
T cells are
yes,
literally, they're like vampires. So
yes,
that's what they
yes.
are. They are vampires. They've now, through microscopy, seen how they can throw little tendrils in there, just like in like bad sci-fi or good sci-fi movies, The Matrix coming out, and it's literally sticking a little tendril in there and it's finding its way and hijacking. What better thing than an energy source? It's like stealing gold or money from a
Yeah.
bank, right? It is an amazing thing that they, and so now, well, that becomes a very powerful discovery for immuno-oncologists. Can we, angiogenesis is part of that, but now we know what it's doing to the actual, cancer cells themselves. It helps to reverse it, right?
Yeah,
Think
so
that way.
so basically, I'll talk you through how they did it. They stained mitochondria and T cells. They discovered that some of the tendrils connecting cancer cells and T cells joined up to 4 nanotubes. So then, using field emission scanning electron microscopy, they watched as the cancer cells slurped the mitochondria out of T cells. So then their next step was then could they prevent cancer cells from doing this? So they injected a drug into mouse models of lung and breast cancers that inhibited the growth of the nanotubes. Tumor growth slowed, they reported. So that's what they've done to date. But yeah, it's fascinating. Great stuff.
Yeah, that's how it starts.
Yeah.
This is like, John, in another 2 years, there'll be some company or companies, several, working on this. It's great stuff. I mean,
I'm happy to work with them if
yeah.
it's a small molecule.
So John, that's our news, and this is we got a fun little format today. So the main portion is really, we were going to just touch on, it's not going to be a long main portion. We're going to discuss the emergence of Omicron variant. It is.
Yes, Omicron, there we go.
Yeah. And the emergence of it, and we'll go through a quick couple of things, but John, for time's sake, because we got a lot of questions that I
Yeah.
think should supersede some of our main topic today. But you know what? To me, I have my opinions, but why don't you go through some of the science we're seeing, and then
So
I'll share.
give a little bit of background. So, first article I read about it was on endpoints, and I liked the first paragraph of the article. It says, as Americans were waking up for their Black Friday rituals, they were greeted with the news that a new mutation of the COVID-19 virus has appeared and been sequenced. The variant is tagged as B11529, but quickly warranted its own Greek letter Omicron. So a shout out to, this was researchers in South Africa who actually noticed a large, a jump in terms of infections around Johannesburg. And when they, after noticing that, then they sequenced the virus at the center of that hotspot, and they noticed that it was new and had a lot more mutations than they'd seen previously. And this was the group is the KwaZulu-Natal Research and Innovation Sequencing Platform, and the spokesman is a guy called Tulio de Oliveira. So, like I said, their observation was this was quick, it was severe, and it was really much more. What's the word? It was much more than they expected, especially as they've been dealing with
transmissible, John. Right, it had a high transmission. Right.
Yes, so it's the transmission pieces was the big concern here. So this happened, like I said, Black Friday. Black Friday, I was in Spain and seeing these articles come through, and it was like, it's in South Africa, what's going to happen? Then very quickly it was the UK announced that they'd also detected it. Meantime, Europe and the US had shut down travel from South Africa and other African states, and the indication was it didn't originate in Africa. It was just that the South Africans were the first ones to notice and sequence it. But the big concern with Omicron is really its contagiousness, and it's already, so that's what, how many weeks ago? 3 weeks ago, a little bit over 3 weeks ago, and it's already been reported in 89 countries around the world. So
threatening to shut down a lot of things. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So we're all really still trying to figure it out and how to react to it. I think we're still trying to learn about it, and it's a question of what do existing medications and therapies work for it. I think again this comes back to the boosters being go for that third dose if you can, because the vaccines do seem to be functional against it, but of course they're still researching that.
Let's face it. Today, if you get infected with any COVID type of virus or its variants, right, you are much more likely to not die of it. Just from, there was some therapeutics that are out, and even just passive immunity has to be taking place here. So, if you're transmitting the virus, most of us are also transmitting antibodies at this stage. We forget about that, right? Like, even if you're unvaccinated, you're getting the virus, the person giving it to you more than likely has antibodies, right? So there's some of that. It's always going to be based off of I don't think we're dodging a bullet. I'm guessing that the reason why we're still here and viruses haven't just overtaken us is why this has evolved the way it has. This is evolution right in front of us.
Yep.
It's evolving with it's spreading like wildfire, yet it's really not doing much to us. But that's still dangerous because then it can leap. So we got to control this. I don't want to mitigate these outbreaks because they're still potentially killing, and as well as still making people sick. You got to be careful. It really targets children, really small age children. I'll call them babies, and elderly. They need to worry. They've always had to worry about this. It's just some of the silver lining here is it's become so mainstream that we're all going to live a little bit longer if we understand influenza, like COVID. That's what it's causing.
I think it's
us. So sorry, that's I went on my little diatribe there.
I think it's because this is that much more infectious. It makes it more likely that we're all going to catch it at some point or another. With the lower infection rate, it seemed like
Yeah.
with being vaccinated and being careful, then you were unlucky if you caught something. I think Omicron is going to make it more likely that you are likely to get it,
Oh,
but by being vaccinated and like say 3 shots, chances are you'll catch it, but it won't. It does seem to be that if you are vaccinated, that you're going to see a less severe form of it's going, like you say, it's going to be like a cold or something. It's not going to be the severe impact that we saw last year with the earlier variants where there was no vaccine around.
Yeah, knock on wood, right?
Yeah,
Knock on wood.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But I think I don't think it is happening in front of us, or we, because it's here. Let's not be in denial and don't freak out that I said that, but like,
So yeah,
it's in the U.S. It has been for some time. There,
yeah. So I do have to go on. I do have to touch on that. So in terms of South Africa, they looked at, they've obviously gone through various cycles where different variants have hit, and there was the comment said that when Omicron took off in South Africa, it was like a vertical line. It really didn't have a slope to it at all. It was just straight up. So I mean, if it is in an area, it can spread very quickly. So where I am is actually so New York's seen more cases than it's seen before. The UK's seen more cases than it's seen before. But Tompkins County, which is where Ithaca is the main city, we actually were the worst county in the country recently in terms of number of cases, and a lot of it is does testing at Cornell, which is its own independent testing, and then we've got the Cougar Medical Centre do testing too. But looking at Cornell testing, this is a few days ago, they had 115 samples, all of which were all the 115 positive samples they found all were confirmed as cases of Omicron. At the Cougar Medical testing site, which is away from the university, it was a smaller proportion of Omicron versus other variants. But I got one of these alerts on the phone to say I'd been in contact with possibly been in contact with someone who had tested positive for more than 10. I'd been within 6 feet for more than 10 minutes, and I couldn't, when they sort of said on the alert what the date was, I couldn't think where that would come from. But thought, well, I'll do the right thing because it's coming up to Christmas. I've got family coming over. And so I tried to book in the Cougar testing site, and I couldn't get a test for 5 days beyond when I got this alert. So we actually did an at-home test, but it's definitely, we're getting backed up because of the way the Omicron is impacting this area. Because as I've said in the past, we've barely had any cases here, but it's made quite a difference. So also, last weekend, I'm trying to think of my weekend before last, my wife and I were in New York, and as we were there, it was announced that New York now has a mandate where indoor spaces you have to wear masks. So we've gone back in that direction, really in an effort to control or at least mitigate Omicron. You're not going to control it, but at least mitigate it. And so I mean, it doesn't, from my perspective, it doesn't change much my routine, but we are seeing an effect of it.
Yeah, there's so many things I want to comment on. The first one will be Cornell University at 100% vaccine rate as well. And clearly there's probably a hotspot happening there. Somebody must have. The biggest thing that I think of my 16-year-old asking a simple question like, why, how's it getting here to the U.S.? And, it's pretty simple. I think we've shortened, you went on a trip, John, but that's been mitigated quite a bit. We still have so many people that need to go see their families that we overnight didn't just not become, I don't even know, like, if I can call us the melting pot of the world, right? That's not even something you hear in America anymore. But and when I said that to him, he was like, "Oh, that makes sense because we know a lot of people that need to go visit family and so forth." So, and then there's also just business, right? There's
Yeah,
still an
sure.
element of people that are they just have to, their jobs are, our economy relies on it. We have to have some diplomacy. There has to be some degree. I mean, when I say has to, that's a big word,
Yeah,
but we can't just not do it. So I think what I'm
exactly. And
driving
if
at
I,
is
if
it's
I
not a
could,
big, it's here, it's not a big deal, I think, but we still just got to be cognizant of it. And I'll just stop right there. Yeah.
yeah, and I mean, if I can just chime in on the travel thing, I mean, we'd seen obviously as particularly in our professional environment, more and more of us are vaccinated. Conferences had moved from virtual to physical, and so I was like I said, I was in Barcelona the week of Thanksgiving. But for so. Spain was a good country to go to because it's got high vaccination rates. So you didn't feel that it felt good walking around there. Again, people were very good about wearing masks or indoors and also on like the underground and stuff. But if I just looked at me as an example, obviously there I was in Barcelona. Coming back, I went from Barcelona to Heathrow, from Heathrow to
Mm.
Chicago. No, yeah, from no, hold on. From Heathrow to Charlotte, Charlotte to no, sorry, Heathrow to Chicago, Chicago to Charlotte, Charlotte to because there's four
Mm.
airports I'm in. So there's all contact points with people if I was infected or I could be infected by someone else. And I'm just one person.
Yeah.
That's how these things happen. I mean,
Yeah.
it isn't like someone necessarily came from South Africa or wherever to the US. It just might be that they cross paths with someone.
And
And
that's why we're not immune here in Kansas City. Cause I think some people feel like, oh, but you're not, if you want to get on a plane ever, or, even go into your local grocery store, you have to come to grips with, you know, I don't know. Anyhow, John, I think we've got a fair amount of questions. Do you want
sure.
to
Just
anything else on the
Ju-
Omicron
Yeah,
or
just a couple of things on the Omicron. I mean, so yeah, so I think both Pfizer and Moderna have said that if you have boosters, their vaccines are effective against Omicron. So they both have come out and said that in the last week or so. I think Moderna actually announced that on Monday. Um, so also we talked about the Merck and Pfizer pills. Pfizer certainly think that their pill should still be effective against the Omicron variant because it doesn't rely on it's not affected by the mutations.
Mhm.
It's all down to its mechanism of action. But they've only tested that in vitro so far, so we don't
Well,
have
that's a good
really
sign.
definitive data.
Yep.
But the other what are affected are actually the antibodies. So
Mm.
Regeneron and Lilly antibodies, I think they struggle against Omicron, and the one antibody that is actually still is actually shown that it can be effective is the one that's the collaboration between Vir and GSK, but that's in short supply. So
Yeah,
this is again, it
they
comes back
all
to
are.
here's why it's really important to get vaccinated. Don't rely on getting sick and hoping you can deal with it and go into hospital where you'll get antibody treatment because there's no antibodies to treat you. It's
Yeah,
really
yeah. Those
it,
have been depleted. Yes, they
yes,
have been.
yes.
Um, and probably haphazardly at times, if you want. But that's okay. I don't have any right to say that. I want to be clear. I don't know that. But there is some. Maybe it's not bad. So those antibodies are definitely triggered to deal with more virulent forms of it. So maybe I don't
Ye-
know.
I,
Maybe I'm
I
trying
think
to spin a happy light on that, right?
yeah,
That
I think they I mean certainly Regeneron was a frontline defense against Delta, but but now Delta's been superseded by Omicron.
I wonder how the convalescent plasma works. That still has,
It's
TDDs written all
interesting you
over it.
mention that
Yeah.
because I saw an article today that said that that could make a comeback in terms
Yeah.
of further
For
discussion.
the
So
right people,
it's
it's
not going
always the
away.
right, it has to, there's a good biomarker story in there to tell you who needs to get what to direct traffic. And I have my thoughts on that, John, but most notably, it would be around the ACE2 receptor there. There's got to be some pharmacofunctional testing that some smart scientist needs to work on. maybe I'll see if my son has a career or something, but he doesn't really like science the way I do. But that's where I think it's at, John. Some way
Sure.
of a quick rapid test to tell, think about how we sort of unpacked HIV. It came down to some mutations in chemokine receptors, and I believe that's what's happening here. I said it from the get-go. It's weird how it's gone dormant to some degree, but I bet you somebody with a lot of intellectual properties working on it hard, John.
Yes, exactly.
I'm sure it's not going unnoticed. I'm not that smart.
So shall we move to questions since it's
Yeah.
all on this topic? And
No, I think it's great. We
move
got
to
quite a
wrap
few.
up.
No,
So
let's do some questions. Yeah, go ahead.
exactly. Let's see what the first one is. Shall I start? Sarah asks, are we going to be facing a new variant every 6 to 12 months indefinitely, leading to yearly COVID vaccines like the flu shot? I mean, I think I'm not sure. It's not really quite like the flu shot. I don't know what we're going to see in terms of how often we'll see these mutations come around. I think it will depend on, you know, what we're seeing with Omicron superseding Delta is it's much more contagious, so it becomes the one that dominates the landscape. It certainly the COVID doesn't mutate at the same rate as flu does, but it might be that. We don't know how many doses. So one of the things that we didn't touch on earlier with the vaccines is that there is a drop off in effectiveness with time. So it might be that we do end up doing multiple doses just to maintain that that the protection in case of COVID being around, because there is certainly discussion about it making the transition from pandemic to endemic,
Yeah.
and it'd be a case of learning to live with it, but that might include multiple vaccinations.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything you said, other than I think in, looking forward maybe 4 or 5 years from now, or maybe 10, you'll just be getting an mRNA flu COVID cocktail vaccine annually. They'll just come together. Remember early on, people were looking at that. This mRNA vaccine it'll boost the flu to move that way, and I think you'll see that flu will start to be an mRNA vaccine
Sure.
based.
Yep.
And then we'll have a cocktail. So I don't disagree with anything you said. I hope we answered you. The short answer is probably. Probably we don't have, if we had that good a crystal ball, we'd be living in Vegas. But I think you can make a choice to get a COVID shot annually, along like you do with a flu shot. So I hope that answered it. Right.
Yep.
So I'll ask the next one. This is from Cassie. She asks, should the CDC adjust their quarantine recommendations given the faster incubation period of each new variant? And then she says, since symptoms appear more quickly, should quarantine lengths be shortened? Wow, that's a dense question.
I think it is actively being discussed, and I saw something today that I heard something on NPR yesterday, just on the off chance, that I think the cycle time when vaccinated people is shorter, so it might be that certainly for vaccinated people that the quarantine period might be reduced.
Yeah, well, I always thought the 14 was excessive, and
Yeah,
then it got
absolutely.
truncated, and then
it went to 10.
It's down to is it down to 10? I feel like it's been down to like 5 or 7. The NFL is already adapting a much quicker. There's your answer. The NFL is doing it in shorter and shorter time. So I believe the answer is yes, and the CDC will follow.
And I think it'll continue to be discussed. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, good question from Cassie. Go ahead, John.
Yep. Cindy asks, how do they distinguish between the variants? Common tests being performed, both antigen and PCR tests, do not make the distinction. It's a sequencing thing, but I'm not familiar enough with it to say how they do it. Dominic, do you know?
Yeah, it's sequencing. It needs to be done. You touched on it. Those individuals, they do have to go in and do some next gen sequencing is one way. They can find primers against pieces, so it can be a PCR based test, but it's not my area of expertise, but it requires a much more sophisticated approach than the test they're doing. Somebody has to collect a whole bunch of
Sure.
samples, and
Yeah.
so this was Tulo DLR
Yes. Yeah.
Vario.
The
Yeah.
KwaZulu
So
Natal.
he's a research and innovating sequencing platform. That's his title, right? So
Yeah.
that it is a sequencing test, and it requires some in silico work. People can now like take what's known and they can start to predict it. So they're going to hedge their bets the right way, and then they can start systematically testing samples, and then
Yeah.
we can lock in on what the fingerprint of it is. So I hope that answered it. But someone could completely disagree with me, but I'm pretty sure I'm pretty close in what I just said. Um, Good question though. So and I think that leads to why can't we find it faster? I understand where Cindy's coming from. How come it takes? What is this? What am I getting tested for? And that but someday we hopefully could have things that could sequence them quicker. But that's a lot of
Yeah.
sci-fi stuff today.
Yeah.
So
Sequencing isn't trivial. So I mean that
no,
takes time to do it. Yeah.
whatever you think you see on like those investigative crime shows, that stuff is not when it comes to what we're talking about in terms of trying to find a viral mutation, and even that stuff is way over the top. So but it's a laborious thing, but it's very doable, and we're getting better at it. I think that I shouldn't say that. We're getting much more rapid with it. So next question. Dane asks, my understanding is that the new Omicron variant while it is easy to get, it does not have as bad an effect as the original or Delta variant. If you get this new variant, does it give you the same antibodies needed to fight against the previous variants? And if so, wouldn't it be better to get this variant, suffer low effects, and be protected against the other worse strains of the virus? Wow, that was great stuff. So there's some truth to what you're saying, but so I'm gonna kind of unpack your question a little bit. My understanding, well, it's easier to get. Does it have any bad effects? Well, no, I don't. I don't think.
Well,
I'm not to a point where you should be doing measles and chickenpox parties. I'm going to say no to
yeah.
that. I want to say out loud, no, despite this being less virulent, you do not want to get this. If
Yeah.
you've been fortunate enough to be resistant, because we've all taken it in, and if you've been fortunate enough to not to suffer getting sick, just take that win and don't go out of your way to get any virus. So I hope my answer to you is like no. It would not be
And
good
can
to
I
get
just
this.
jump on that too?
Sure,
I'm
sure.
going to say it's still early days, and we don't really know. I mean, there have been deaths from Omicron. We don't. I mean, yeah. The other part of it, the picture is somewhat muddied because Delta is actually the dominant strain at the moment.
Yeah,
Omicron,
correct.
we're still learning about Omicron, and chances are because it's so contagious, it will take over from Delta. But
And
it's
we're
not
ahead of
the
it too,
dominant.
right? I'd like to think because we know about it, we're starting to implement some things to mitigate it.
Sure.
We're all
Yeah.
bracing
Yeah.
ourselves over here. Look, you can't go to my brother's house without taking a COVID test because he's living with a 93-year-old woman.
Sure. Not
That's what you need to do. So now you're keeping people honest, but I don't know, maybe that's where we're heading in over time, but the key is to get to a point where we're back to like flu-like endemic, right?
Yeah, and I wouldn't like you say I wouldn't recommend risking getting infected because it's not always just about deaths. It is some of the other symptoms that
Yeah,
are
you don't
can
want to
be
get
widely variable,
yeah.
and they
The
can make you really sick. I mean, I just don't yeah don't
Dane, the answer is no. If you
don't
have
tempt
not
fate.
been sick
Yeah,
and you've been fortunate enough not to, do not go out of your way or walk around thinking you're bulletproof. You
yeah,
do
and
not want to get that. The goal for all of us is to never get sick.
mhm.
That stay asymptomatic, but stay protected. So we got one more, unless you had more to add, John.
No, I think the only thing I would always say, as we've as been a constant theme on this podcast, we would definitely recommend getting vaccinated and boosted, and that's going to be your best protection. So next question is Isaac asks, how, when, where, why exactly do these viruses mutate? Using your scientific expertise, can you explain that in a way we would all understand? I'm going to pass that to you,
Oh,
Dominic.
good Lord. Man, so how, when, where, why? So the virus is a lot like you. And I don't know how much you know, but we're very bilateral, right? Everything, if we're symmetric. There's a lot of um, overlap and redundancy. And I bring up the viruses have a lot of symmetry to them. That's how I study them. I hope that helps paint a picture. And so we've got this highly sophisticated network that allows for somewhat mirror images and overlaps and redundancies. Well, the virus has a similar, it is a lot like we are in that it is symmetrical, it has redundancies, and so when we start to impact the virus and the ability of it to egress, our immune system, innate, adaptive, starts to win, it evolves. So that's maybe I answered a little bit of the how and the maybe the why and when. I don't know if I got some of that, but that's the first step to understanding this. It infects you, you start to combat it, it starts to pivot to other variants because it's got machinery that's in there turning. It's just a little machine. It gets inside of you and it just wants to grow. And then somewhere in there, if you start to win, that machinery is like, oh, we got to stop going left and we're going to move to the right. And that means that the sequencing starts to differ and it evades your immune system. And how it does it is, it's not like it's got in silico artificial intelligence. It's just got, hey, we're turning and turning, and then this guy along the way starts doing its machinery slightly different, and sure enough, when all of his friends are knocked out, he's still alive. Does that make sense? So it's not a sophisticated way. It makes its own, it's probably spewing out mutations periodically and then it dies. I don't know, John, this is the way I see it. So I hope that gives a little sense. And why it happens so quickly is viruses they turn over pretty, I don't want to freak everybody out, but they move pretty quickly inside of you. And so where do they mutate? How can you explain? So where, why, when, all of this action takes place in your lymph nodes mostly. A lot of it goes on there. Then it manifests itself and, you start spewing them out or in the lungs. I guess COVID's mostly lungs, but I'm going to guess a lot of them actual mutating of the virus probably occurs in the base center of the immune cells. And I would think that is in your lymph nodes. Wow, interesting. I don't even know if that's true what I said. I just kind of guessed. Maybe I'll have to go look that one up. So, but I would, if I'm the virus, I'm attacking home base, and that's the lymph node. So that's my best shot at that. I don't hold me to that one, Isaac. I hope it made sense in my mind. I hope I gave you a good understanding of how it takes advantage of its ability to turn processes quickly and evade our immune system. So a lot of it is just Darwinism at its finest. It mutates itself, it doesn't die off, but suddenly all of its stronger brethren are getting knocked out by our immune system, and that becomes the dominant form.
Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, it doesn't always reproducibly replicate, and then some replications evade the immune system better than others, so they then persist, and that's how you've got a mutation you're dealing with.
It's the virus is definitely engineered to be evasive. That's why we have it. Well, you need you need viruses. Your microflora needs some of it. I want to be clear about that. If you were viral free, you'd be in big trouble. You wouldn't be able to eat much, so it's kind of a symbiotic relationship. We need some of them. Not some. We've just evolved with them. They're in us. There's no way that's why when you take an antibiotic regimen, it has its side effects on you, right? And I'm going into the bacteria space, but we now know viruses are ubiquitous within us. And then there's ever more emerging evidence that potentially most of your cancers and tumors could be related to a viral either cause or some sort of opportunistic. And there's more to come on that. I do think over time will show almost every tumor has a viral infection to it. So now I'm talking myself back. I think I want to get rid of every virus in my body, John, if I can. Keep the bacteria. I need them. So this is, I hope you guys got a peek into my strange little mind when it comes to immunology, I guess.
So I think we're done on this one.
That was wonderful.
Yes.
Well, but that was all the questions. We want to thank all of you for those questions. Please keep them up. We'll Absolutely. Take topics as well. John, I'm not going to tell you about my weekend. It's Christmas. We're going to connect after the new year. You got any parting words? Otherwise, I'm going to say happy holidays to you.
No, I'm just sort of one more day's work. I'm looking forward to a nice long break because I haven't taken much over the year, and this is time to spend some time with family and just relax. So looking forward to picking up again in the new year.
Well said. It's been a great year, but definitely a hard working year.
Yes, very.
It's been a great year. Everybody enjoy your holiday, and we'll see you in 2022
for podcast number 53. And we just have to figure out what the main topic of that one's going to be. But I'm sure we'll be all fired up and ready to go next year.
Yeah, you stay safe, everybody, and happy holidays to you.
Absolutely.